So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out this evening. Great to be here.
Sorry.
That's right. So this is me. Yes, I've worked in a lot of different countries, a lot of different companies. Currently Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Transport. We have a really interesting situation there at the moment where we're merging a whole bunch of different departments. So it's a bit chaotic, but fun. It's business transformation at its peak. But it's, I think, an excellent opportunity to come and talk about web today and web security. To me, the web is kind of the nexus of all of the great things about technology. So the web has interactions for all of pretty much all of the users of the world. We've got a penetration rate, I think, of about 70% of users. Population of the world using phones and the web. We've got human to system interactions, but also system to system interactions. So it's not just social media. It's not just surfing the web anymore. It's so much more than that. It's connected cars and internet fridges and things like that, and so much more. And so we're seeing huge amounts of opportunity in the web for all different types of businesses. AusPost is a great example. Zendesk is another great example where web technology is at the forefront of innovation. And I would suggest that it's probably in that space because it's so the technology at the moment has developed to be so easy for us to use as well. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants who've put so much framework and technology into the web, and it's really just the central place of the central tool set that we can innovate on, and because of that, digitization revolves around it. Interesting web stats here. For me, we've got 5.1 billion. Unique mobile users in the world, and I included that one. There's a slight drop in the numbers for web users specifically, but I would suggest that mobile users are leveraging a lot of web technology anyway, so I've included it there. Public cloud growth as well, I think is backs a lot of the web interactions, a lot of the technology that we build these days. So I think it's a worthy inclusion. Only 214.3 billion dollars in revenue, public cloud revenue, a 17.5% growth rate in 2019. Pretty staggering numbers, to be honest, but it's only going up. The last one there for me is particularly interesting. Kubernetes. Is anyone familiar with Kubernetes?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. 5 years ago, Kubernetes didn't exist, and to me, that's kind of a litmus test for great technology changing the way in which, fundamentally changing the way in which we've been operating and developing our businesses. Only 5 years ago, the web being only sort of 20 or so years, 25 years ago, years old. So massive change, massive social change, massive technology change, and so lots of great opportunities. Can anyone think and maybe share an example of a benefit that they can see, either social or technological, to do with the web? I really enjoy the web technology, but you guys play with it probably day to day, whereas it's kind of my hobby. Can anyone suggest another benefit that of web technology? Memes, yeah, that's a good one. I always think that they're like the ultimate expression of humanity, right? So you can express anything in a meme. Yeah, it's a good one. Anyone else? More socialization, but less intended. Is that?
Less connection.
Oh, less connection. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so a bit of a pro and a con there, perhaps. Yeah. Anyone else? Mass notification. Yeah, okay, so maybe, so better communications to bigger groups, dispersed groups?
Oh, you mean more in security, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. So that we've got issues, so we've got an issue here, we need to fix it, that sort of stuff, or?
Or,
Yeah.
or shooting.
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, connecting to the masses. Yep. Accessibility, yeah, great. That's a good one. Yeah.
Settling arguments.
Sorry, what was that?
Settling arguments.
Yeah.
Like which way to face the toilet paper.
Yeah. Yeah, you
how do you
can.
dress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can solve a lot of things that way. Yeah, it's a good idea. And the natural continuation of that, some of the threats, some of the things that I can see. Has anyone seen the film Hacked on Netflix? It's like a documentary film on Netflix. Pretty scary, to be honest. I watched it the other day. It's around election fraud, not fraud, yeah, influencing elections, and in particular in the US and Brexit and things like that, and has a pretty pretty dark, gloomy sort of picture of leveraging the web and technology and the way in which we interact with it. It's kind of dystopian, really. It's not nice. But any other threats that we can see? Creating echo chambers, yeah. Echo. Yep. Yep. Good one. Yeah. Yeah. Especially if the search engines are sort of optimizing content which we're interested in, so we only get that echo chamber. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, excellent. That's a good one. So the suggestion, if we didn't hear that, was connectedness of servers and services. Systems that weren't previously connected. We've seen things like Stuxnet, which is one of the first big hacks by a nation state publicly. It was about 2008 when the US was hacking the centrifuges, the centrifuges which enrich uranium in Iran, and they hacked all the industrial control systems to essentially disintegrate them. They'd just spin too fast and they'd break. So a good example, they actually used USB keys because they actually had them disconnected, but they're still connected even when there's an air gap. Another one I thought of was we've got Tesla making great strides towards connected cars and autonomous driving, but there is a threat there that when we are not doing it ourselves, that cars will be potentially hacked and kill people. Tesla's aiming not for that to happen, obviously, and they're looking to get a tenfold improvement in safety. But there's an interesting threat there. Yeah.
Especially we got to put a
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if there'll be like a fourth factor authentication in the future where you'll have a video, you'll have to stand in front of the webcam and do a dance, and your particular spin, will give you the access. Yeah, but I get your point.
it's a loss of privacy to operations.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, loss of privacy. There was an OVIC. So the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner recently released a compliance notice for Public Transport Victoria, and they'd shared about 1.8 billion records, travel records, on purpose, but perhaps without the due privacy considerations. And researchers were able to reconstruct data with the help of other data sets to kind of identify people. And so privacy is, I would say this is almost a turning point for privacy. And it's having getting a fair bit of spotlight attention. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, fake news. Yeah, good one. Yeah, I think that kind of goes to the election influencing that we've seen in the past, and probably will see for a while until we develop the right social controls to limit that. So they're excellent suggestions. So thank you. I wanted to quickly cover some of the fundamentals of security. There's some language which we use, one called threat actors, another one threat landscape, and we use these terms to kind of measure threat, yes, but also to help us make risk-based decisions. And so I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of that, because it's important when we're talking about security that we can make those educated risk-based decisions. So threat actors, I'm a big James Bond fan. So a couple up here that we've got. Script kiddies on the left here. It's the kids in the basements. And this was started in the 1980s, people doing IRC channel takeovers, if anyone remembers that. And, ejecting CD drives backwards and forwards and knocking people's coffee over it in the process. And so, creating havoc and just playing with things and kind of exploring technology, really. And so now we call them script kiddies because there's a lot of things that you can sort of get off the shelf and you can play with, and it's probably still good fun. It's probably easier than ever, to be honest. But and then we've got kind of an evolution here, sort of left to right. The script kiddies, a few of the criminally minded folk, banded together, and then proper organised crime, the mafias around the world, sort of took note and figured out that they could monetize cyber crime. So organised crime is a big one. We see a lot of ransomware. We see a lot of the malware that causes chaos and demands money. So that's certainly one way. A lot of spam as well. Hacktivists. A couple of good examples were Anonymous, definitely, and Wikipedia. They're highly motivated typically, and it doesn't have to be just these groups as well. It could be a group that is passionate about green chairs or puppy dogs, buying puppy dogs, or whatever it is. It could be absolutely anything. It's about having a motivation and a will to be heard, and then having the skill and to be able to pull it off, I suppose. With a lot of tools coming off the shelf, so hacking tools coming off the shelf, and a general lack of maturity across organizations, if you're on the wrong side of sort of social justice, I suppose, you can find yourself a target. And likewise, governments are particularly interested in defending against this, because sometimes they make bad moves and people get upset, rightfully upset. So hacktivists, a big group. Nation states, can anyone tell me where that image is from? James Bond, excellent. That's the modern Q. Nation states. So I was trying to figure out a kind of there's not many, pictures of people, actual spies, but so it was hard to, the Google search was. So we've got, the nation states are currently waging war, somewhat invisibly. And it's been going on for ages. It was probably about sort of 5 to 10 years ago, the US was banging the drum, saying, "Oh, and China's hacking us, China's hacking us." As it turns out, everyone's hacking everyone, and no one's immune to it, and no one's guilt-free either. So I actually read the other day that nations are starting to think about setting some rules of engagement of cyber warfare, just to sort of normalise that. yeah, whatever. So the important thing for nation states, though, is that they are extremely well-resourced, typically highly motivated, and there's not many companies or organizations in the world who would have a chance at stopping a nation state. So they've generally got a big stash, a cache, if you like, in military terms, of weaponized 0 days. No one knows about them. They're constantly researching them, and these weaponized 0 days will, compromise a service in matter of moments without any trace, because they're super well resourced and motivated. And we've also got a couple of others that I've included. Insiders. So, yeah, does anyone know the reference there from Insiders? Office Space, fantastic. It was all about the red stapler, and in the end, Milton burns down the company building because he's relegated to the basement to his work, and someone steals his stapler. And so insiders are typically authorized. They've got a position of privilege, I suppose, inside the organization. They've got access to data, but they can be incredibly disruptive or destructive. Likewise, competitors. I've used a Trojan horse reference here, but you get the idea that, and in quite a few cases now, we're seeing competitors, or even between buyers and sellers of sort of large commodities in mining, for example. A buyer will hack the mining company to figure out what's the lowest price they can put on the table during negotiations. Not unheard of, and governments get involved when this happens, and there's a couple of examples in Australia. So, with that as the context, the background, the backdrop of what we've got, so I wanted to quickly go through a nice little data tool here. So this is a sort of a live data tool, and it just gives us an idea of. I'll see if I can make this full screen. So there's a lot of bubbles on this map. The ones they're somewhat color coded in terms of the sensitivity. So we've got the lighter colored ones are somewhat less sensitive. The red ones, this Firebase one is particularly interesting here, which is if you can read it, it's actually Firebase is a service, a Google service, database, which is often used in web applications. So about a year ago, a whole bunch of applications were identified that they were using this backend database, and it wasn't locked down. So a bit like your Amazon S3 buckets, and we've got 113 gigabytes of data that's just exposed to the world. We've got Capital One, 100 million records exposed. Marriott Hotels, 383 million. We've got, there was a British Airways one recently. Well, actually, that's the second one, because there was another one more recently than that. Australian National University, close to home. And if we go down, we can see the bubbles get slightly smaller, and maybe a little bit less sensitive, perhaps. But some of these bubbles at the top, like that's a lot of bubbles at the top. Whether they're floating, they're drinking a lot of sparkling water or something. I don't know. They're floating up high. So the context the point I'd like to make is that, and I was talking to some folk earlier. We have such an active threat environment. It's not whether a company will be attacked or will be compromised. It's probably already happened. And it's one of the really important things from a strategic perspective, a security strategic security plan is to really focus on cyber resilience. Cyber resilience gives us that perspective that we have been compromised, yes, but we should be able to have a capability where we can reduce the impact of those compromises as quickly as possible. So let's jump back into this. All right. So let's go through some of the fundamentals. We've got a slide that I quite like, and just to give a little bit of context about where we ought to be spending our energy. So this is from Boston Consulting Group, a well-known management consulting firm, and the statistics here are about 72% of breaches result from organisational process and people failures, which are often overlooked. And if you look at the blue area on the graph, that top left quadrant, only really about 28% of the control of the security breaches are as a result of a technical control, inadequate technical control. The rest of the pie, the very large percentage of it, is really all about the people and the processes at an organisation. So we have to be cognizant of that when we're looking at pragmatic security controls. We can invest a whole bunch in technical controls, and that's sometimes good, and we'll probably have a tendency to do that even in the web world because we're tech focused. But there are a whole bunch of process controls and people controls that are often overlooked and probably more valuable and worthwhile of our investment. So a couple of the fundamentals that I want to leave you with today. So common sense. Security is not a dark art. It's mostly common sense. The reference I've got here, the analogy is, would you leave your wallet or purse unattended in a bar? And it's a rather casual analogy, but it's relevant, and there's a whole bunch of different analogies which are similar. You know, how would you secure your car, or or what do you do with your banking details? So there are some really casual analogies where security may get overlooked, but mostly it's common sense, and it doesn't require much investment, I suppose, to get a very good rate of return. Hygiene. Hygiene is akin, another analogy. We wash our hands, we take a shower, we wash our clothes, we go to the doctor when we're feeling a bit ill. And there's a basic hygiene that we have around security as well. So strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, updating our systems, and organizations like Google and Apple recognize that as well. You'll see on your mobile phone, who's seen an update on their phone, an application update on their phone this week? Yeah, so the majority of the audience. That automatic patching cycle is a fantastic security initiative, but it's something that doesn't often happen in server worlds where we're hosting our web applications, unless we've got this all singing, all dancing CI/CD pipeline. But it's important. Backup is also there, as is limiting access to data for users, giving them just enough data to do their job. Risk management is fundamentals for us to be able to make good choices. And governance. Governance seems to be boring, probably is boring, but it's actually really, really important. When you're in an organization, if you've got someone who owns security, is accountable for security, that's a really important thing. Because typically, if they're accountable for it, they're signing off on it. So identifying that one person who owns it, or who's going to get fired, essentially, if something goes wrong, is a great way to get some action. And likewise, responsibilities. I want to really quickly go through risk management. It's a bit of a dry topic, but again, fundamental to the way in which we manage organizations. You'll see here we've got a matrix. We've got on the bottom, working from the bottom up, we've got impact. and from on the matrix side, the coloured side, we've got probability. So what's the chance of something happening, and what's the consequence of something happening? And importantly, the impact in this, and I've included this particular risk matrix. There's hundreds, thousands. Everyone makes their own, but the impacts are actually broken up into different streams. So you'll see you've got a cost figure to the organisation, which is definitely a good metric. A schedule, potentially impact to schedule or productivity, product quality, impact to product quality, impact to safety, impact to the environment, impact to reputation. Now, lots of organisations will have lots of different dimensions of impact that they care about, and they need to be considered to get a proper view on risk. And you'll see that you've got risks, typically a 5x5 matrix, 1 all the way to 25, and organisations will weight the risk according to their appetite, and they need to be able to understand what their appetite is. So for a business to be successful, you have to take risk. You won't be in business if you're not willing to take any risk. Simple opportunities and consequences. So you'll have to set that threshold, that appetite, and you need to be able to manage risk and understand it for a particular business to make those right decisions. So a couple of quick governance questions. As I said, who's accountable for security? What are the top threats for the organisation? So a bit of threat modelling, if you like. What are the security objectives of the organisation? So they change. Sometimes people say, and I have heard some people say, no, we don't want any risk. We don't want any risk to our data. Well, then you can't share it. You can't have it connected. You can't have a mobile application. You can't, have any web applications at all. You may as well, stick it under, a polar ice cap or something like that, at least until global warming destroys us. What are the security objectives? How do you measure those security objectives? How do they align to strategy? Who's responsible for delivering the security objectives? And which framework best fits an organisation? Which brings me to AWASP. Hands up if you've seen AWASP before. Fantastic. That's excellent. I'm really excited about that. Can anyone suggest a framework, a product from AWASP that they're familiar with? Anyone? Has anyone seen one of the AWASP products? No? Has anyone heard of the AWASP Top 10? Yeah, okay, cool. So the AWASP Top 10 is good, but I actually really like their application security verification standard. So I like this standard because I think it's a nice checklist, if you like, for a range of different uses. One, it can be used as a metric during testing, during auditing, and also for marketing. So it's a great assurance mechanism where you can say it's got about 286 controls in the latest version. And because it's an industry standard, it's got a lot of traction now. It's a great way to say to a customer, we've built a web application, we've chosen our level, where we want to be, how many of those controls we want to adopt, what's pragmatic for our business, and this is our score. These are our verifications against that standard. So it's a great way to encourage a client, a potential client, or even internal stakeholders. But it also can be used as a design guide, and during development, we can write tests around these verifications, and we can run it through CI/CD. Third-party dependencies are becoming more and more important. Third parties deliver huge portions of functionality these days, and so from a procurement perspective or a third-party assurance perspective, that's great. There's another complementary space. OWASP have kind of split the web applications and the mobile side of businesses, even though they overlap. So there is a mobile version of this as well, with a couple of really key publications, which suit. So it brings me to the top security tips. Now, as I said, I don't think security is hard. I actually think it's mostly common sense. You just need a little bit of guidance sometimes on the areas that you're interested in. So I've put these together for a range of different audiences. For UX and front end, security should be positive and it should be easy. So we were talking about Capture before. Capture is a really good example of where security was necessarily, unfortunately, complex. It was hard for users to engage with it. It caused people to leave and not use our services. But when we're thinking about user interaction and security being important, we don't want security to be a blocker. We don't want it to be obtuse. We want it to be just a natural outcome of a great experience. So that takes a lot of effort and it takes some initiative, but that's what we should be aiming for. So keep that in your mind when we're thinking about system design and usability as well. So experience. Client-side controls can be disabled, ignored. It's a little bit hard to see, but that image in the middle is a picture of a security boom gate in the middle of a field, and it's not very effective. And because of the snow, it's kind of shows up. That's a perfect example. So I started my career as a penetration tester. When I was testing web applications, I would just turn all the JS off. I'd be using a proxy. I'd be hitting the APIs. I'd be seeing what the UI wanted me to do, and then I would ignore it. There's a couple of examples that I remember where there was an admin interface, and the way to get to the admin interface was to click a particular button that was just hidden actually from the users just graphically. So if you knew it was there, and if you've done some work with the application, you could just punch in that URL and go straight to the admin interface, or you could disable the JS and that menu would appear as well. So, so just keep in mind that the users, JS is client side. That's great and it's good for user experience, but don't expect that your adversaries are going to play by those rules. The headless bots are a great example of that as well. Adaptive authentication, session management. This actually plays quite closely, I think, to the bots and managing that user experience. So adaptive authentication allows us to be able to say, and Google does this really well, by the way. So if you log into Google, you're doing your browsing, great. You go into your Google account, you want to change your password. You may have already used multi-factor authentication, but doing some really high value security function will cause their system, their adaptive authentication, to say, listen, this is a really sensitive function, and irrespective of your previous authentication, we're going to get you to do it again. But in counter to that, you also may have a less sensitive function, and it'll allow you to do that because you've recently authenticated or you've had a session open for three weeks. You might just need one factor of authentication, not 2 or 4, whatever. So it's an adaptive system. That's a good user experience because it means that there's not that break of flow. So watch that space. I think that's only going to get better as we get more data collected from things like recapture and those measurements from human interaction. APIs and backend. Authentication and authorization are key. The 2 A's there are different. Authentication. Does anyone describe authentication to me quickly? You are who you are. Yeah, exactly. So authentication is about identity. Authorization is about what you can access. So we know who you are and we know what you should be able to access. So you're authorized to access this room or this building or your own car, but you're not authorized to access another car even though you've got a driver's license. Validate all input. So when I was breaking applications, I'd be fuzzing stuff. I'd be would have a lot of fun with recapture and things like that. But you've got to validate all of that input. Don't trust it because users will send a whole bunch of garbage. Sometimes just because they don't understand, but sometimes because they're trying to break your system. And so from an API level, you need to be able to validate that against maybe a schema, yes, but also the bounds of those fields that you're expecting. So even validating the schema. And be resilient to attack and abuse. So similar to our previous presentation where we've got bots trying to abuse our services or scraping maybe 80% of the traffic. There's a whole bunch of stress testing that we should employ in our own testing routines to make sure that our systems are resilient. And it's also about, it's not just about making them resilient and spending a whole bunch of money on your public cloud. It's also about trying to filter out early when you don't want a request to consume resources. Classic example we used to use for denial of service was having, so in HTTP, you've got head and get, right? We used to use head requests on certain vulnerable applications. We'd make a head request to something that was really expensive backend for like I/O, and we'd just keep calling head requests for that particular resource. And in the background, the service would go off, do all this I/O, do all the number crunching, spend a second, and then come back to us and just give us the head of the HTTP saying, "Yep, we got it, great." So there was a big discrepancy between the load on the service and the load that user was getting back with all that data, and so we'd be able to call like a head requests 100,000 times in the space of seconds, and then the backend service would be doing 100,000 requests that each take a second, completely consuming resources and not being resilient to the attack. So it's about optimization of resources as well. Development, design for security. I actually, this little snippet under design for security, all user stories and features contain functional security constraints such as a user, should I be able to view, I should be able to view my own profile, view and edit my own profile, but I shouldn't be able to view and edit someone else's profile. Is anyone doing those sorts of user stories at the moment? Is that a commonplace? I haven't seen it that much. No? Okay. So that is actually one of the controls out of ASVS around, I think it's in their architecture and design principles area. I think that's a great, so it's kind of almost like evil user stories, but taken to a bit more of a constraint focus. I think that's great. Threat modeling. Threat modeling is an excellent collaborative way to share information. We used to do this not within a product team necessarily, but we used to do this as a group of hackers in my formative years. And what would be great, I found, from threat modeling is we'd get different perspectives. So someone would know backend, someone would know front end, someone would know some sort of esoteric technology. But combined, we'd be able to understand the threats, some of those threat actors, where their interests are, what data are we holding that's valuable. The truth is you can't protect from everything. So if you think your primary your primary threat actor is going to be a nation state, you've got probably Buckleys of being able to fix everything and put it all in place. You've got to be quite strategic. No organization has unlimited resources. So threat modeling helps us understand where the threats are going to come from and protect accordingly. And test. Automate your tests, get the security tests into your CI/CD as early as possible. It gives you that early feedback. It gives you better efficiency with your dev resources. And importantly, I think as an ex-pen tester, it gives you a lot of extra value in the security services. Here, put your hand up if you currently interact with the penetration testing service as part of your deployments and your product releases. Who's familiar with penetration testing? Okay, yeah, most of the room. How many people find it disruptive? And not disruptive, maybe that's a poor term. useful. Sometimes I find that it comes at the end of a test cycle, and you get a whole bunch of red at the end of a report, and it's not really correlated to your release cycle as well as it should be. Is that can I get a show of hands for people who feel that way? Yeah, a couple. Anyone had really good experiences where it's really early and you get great feedback? A wave of the hand is all I've got. Okay, so I think penetration testing is a very useful service, but a service that is creative. So if we understand what it and use it for what it is, penetration testing takes creative, skilled individuals who look at things differently and can do to make test things in the way in which they weren't designed to be tested or built. If you can push as many of those security, the low-hanging fruit from either an ASVS standard into your CI/CD, get those user stories which have those constraints on them, get those in early and make those part of your development lifecycle, you make it much harder for the penetration testers, which is great from a product perspective. But it also, you get more value out of that penetration testing service because you're using it for what it is. There's a lot of commodity penetration testing where they're just going to run an automated tool over your code, over your application, get basic results, give it back to you, charge you a mint, and it doesn't really integrate nicely into your CI/CD, right? So push as much of that into the testing cycle. It's the basics are quite simple, really. Infrastructure. This is actually another area where you get a lot of efficiencies. So infrastructure as code. I love infrastructure as code. Definable, testable, repeatable. You can throw all of those penetration testing, the basic penetration testing use cases at it, improve it, get it into a repo. There's just so much benefit. I also think leveraging the cloud. I'm pro-cloud. Why am I pro-cloud? I'm pro-cloud because you get 80% of the security controls at the press of a button that you would never be able to implement yourself with any reasonable budget. The public clouds these days have so much investment, so much scale. It's almost there's almost no other logical option, if that makes sense. So you can certainly run something up in your own data center. You can run your own infrastructure. You could anyway, it's just very expensive, and the effort required to get to a comparative level in terms of security is millions, like seriously millions. So for most, there's a few cases where you wouldn't, but they are the few exceptions, and so I recommend to people use the cloud. And that decision should also be a risk-based decision. So you need to have the good risk management, but the answer should almost always be, in my opinion, cloud. Automation and resilience, DevOps pipelines, CI/CD, invest into that because it will give you a huge ability of flexibility of changing your application and being resilient. So project management. Security requirements, often overlooked and common sense, really. But the basic things, what are your legislative requirements? What are your regulatory requirements? What are your customer expectations of security? Let's take a quick survey of the users, of the people we have in the room as customers of applications. Actually, we'll do it another way. I work for the Department of Transport. What are the citizens' expectations of security? Do you expect security to be an additional extra that we invest in, or do you naturally expect security to be part of what we do, the services we provide? So the former, additional extra, security is an additional extra on top of the government services you get? Right. And a natural part of all the services you get, we're protecting your data? Exactly. So this is the natural customer expectation. It's ingrained in everything we do. We expect it to be baked in. So set those up front when you're running a project. Manage risk, and it's not just about project risk and deliverables and things like that. It's also about security obligations and whether you can meet them. I would also say choose a security standard which is relevant to you. It may be something like AWASP ASVS if you're in the web world, but it may be something else. There's a plethora of them out there. I actually think they're kind of like hamburger, right? So you've got all these security standards, and if you made a hamburger out of them, they wouldn't fall over. Like they're that similar. But choose a standard and pragmatically apply it. So there's a lot of intent behind the words. Don't be naive. If it says thou shalt have a web server and it will run PHP 4. Yeah, that's there's some sort of intent behind it. What was the intent behind it? Maybe it was an old standard. It was written for a particular case. They chose PHP 4 because they thought it was a good one. It was compatible. There's some sort of intent behind it. There's some sort of reason. I've often seen things like you've got really sensitive data. You will live in a vault. Like all of your people that dev on this will live in a vault. There will be no air. Everyone will have to wear air masks or scuba kit, maybe. That'd be exciting. You'd even have to wear flippers in. So the point is that there's a lot of intent behind it. You may have to, the intent is that you need to keep it physically secure, but be pragmatic about it. Don't just take it prima facie. So say AWASP ASVS, talk to your clients, get someone who knows the standard, who can help you interpret that. That's really important for project management. And I was going to include a quote here, but I've run out. Has anyone got a good security quote? I'll let you do the work for me. Anyone got a good security quote? One of the guys at work I've worked with him for a long time. At the bottom of his email, he says, security is always too much until it's not enough. And I actually quite like that. I think it's got a bit of longevity as well. Especially in the old days of security, where security used to be the no police. Someone would ask, can we do this with the public cloud? And no. And that was kind of the rhythm we used to have. I don't think that's the approach we can take anymore. We need to be part of the project. We need to be part of the product. It needs to be integrated. Yeah, thank you very much.